Good morning, friends of WLA. My name is Laura Adjangba, and I'm the president of Women Leaders in Action. Thank you for joining us for the 6th episode of Empowered Women Empower. In celebration of Black History Month, today's episode is about the African diaspora, experiences and challenges. In the words of Marcus Garvey, a people without the knowledge of their history, origin, and culture is like a tree without roots. Women Leaders in Action is a 501c3 nonprofit organization based in New Jersey. We are dedicated to empowering women for success through personal and professional development, mentoring, promoting diabetes awareness, and community outreach activities. Our guest today is Dr. Opoku Agyeman. Dr. Agyeman holds a PhD in political science and has held many professorial positions at many institutions, including the University of the West Indies in Trinidad, the University of Dar es Salaam in Tanzania, the University of California at Berkeley, Cornell University, Drew University, Bard College, and Montclair State University. Dr. Agyeman is currently a research fellow at the University of Zululand in South Africa. Friends of WLA, please join me in welcoming Dr. Opoku Agyeman to this forum. Dr. Agyeman, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I feel honored to be invited to speak at a Black History Month event. First recognized in 1976, it is observed in remembrance of the sweepingly excruciating experiences, as well as occasionally uplifting experiences that chronicle the history of the African diaspora. And we cannot overemphasize the importance of history. As Stokely Carmichael put it, quote, "In order to map out the future, we must clearly understand the past." To which Malcolm X added, "History is a people's memory, and without a memory, man is demoted to the level of the lower animals. When you have no knowledge of your history, you are just another animal." Now, your organization, Women Leaders in Action, seeks to empower African women. Power is a key concept in political science. It is often referred to as the currency of both domestic and international politics. Those who don't have it, or those who have only a little of it, have little to say about how they are governed and whether or not their lives are lived in peace and security wherever they are, or whether they are invaded and despoiled by rampaging, ferocious foreign marauders. As Walter Rodney would put it, the very long, tragic reign of Arab enslavement of Africans, followed the equally interminable servitude at the hands of Europeans, was the result of Africa's loss of power. The depleted state of Africa's defensive capabilities. The continuing powerlessness of Africans, both in Africa and around the world, has kept Africans everywhere at the bottom of the social universe, with all the repercussions of belittlement, marginality, and disrespect that this entails. Africans are disrespected, not only on account of political weakness, but also because Africans lack a distinctive cultural identity. The loss of a distinctive sense of identity, the escape into universalism, is at the heart of the problem. As Don Granville Davis has noted, quote, "We have been everywhere, have been molded in every identity, have taken of every culture, practiced every religion, and believed in everybody, save ourselves. we need to recognize that the African diaspora has two historical phases: the forcible versus the voluntary. The 400-year violent removal of Africans versus the post-abolition immigration of Africans. What did the post-slavery voluntary immigrants learn from the unspeakably tragic career of the Africans who preceded them to the Americans as slaves? The depredations of African life under slavery, the long nightmare of being used as chattel, as donkeys of Europeans over 400 years, is at issue here. It was not until December the 6th, 1865, by way of the 13th Amendment, that slavery was abolished. Article 1, Section 2 of the US Constitution, which was ratified in 1788, had declared a Black person as 3/5 of a person. In 1858, Abraham Lincoln declared, and I quote, I am not, nor ever have been, in favor of bringing about in any way the social and political equality of the white and Black races. I am not, nor ever have been in favor of making voters or jurors of Blacks, nor qualifying them to hold office. I will say in addition to this, that there is a physical difference between the white and Black races, which I believe will ever forbid the two races living together on terms of social and political equality. And inasmuch as they cannot so live, while they do remain together, there must be the position of superior and inferior. And as much as any other man, I am in favor of having the superior position assigned to the white race. Indeed, for the most part, Africans continue to be thought of as such species, as subspecies. In 1606, an African was put on display in the Monkey House of New York's Bronx Zoo alongside an orangutan. This was in 1606. Awareness of the African experience overseas as European slaves might have spared a young Khoikhoi woman from South Africa who boarded a ship for England in 1810, thinking she could make it there. Instead, she was put on display around Europe as a sexual freak, paraded naked on runways, forced to walk, sit, or stand, so that audiences could better see her protruding backside and large genital organs. Even when she died, destitute and diseased, the Hottentot Venus, as he was called, did not get a decent burial. Napoleon Bonaparte, Surgeon General, made a plastic cast of her body and put it along with jars of her pickled body parts on display at the National Museum de l'Homme in Paris. Awareness of Haiti's history would have saved the Africans in French African colonies from the monumental exploitation they have endured and continue to endure at the hands of France. Going back to the 18th century, Haiti represented what David Bell has called the most horrific system of slavery ever seen in human history, at the hands of French plantation owners, who literally worked the African captive laborers to death while producing 40% of the sugar and 60% of the coffee consumed in Europe, on top of enormous quantities of cotton, chocolate, and textile dyes. The conditions for these slaves were truly horrendous. They were hanged with heads downward, drowned in sacks, crucified on planks, buried alive, crushed in mortars, forced to eat excrement, thrown into boiling cauldron of cane syrup, put inside barrels studded with spikes, and rolled downsides into the abyss. No wonder the average life expectancy of these slaves was 21 years. After 12 years of fighting assaulted European armies, including that of Napoleon Bonaparte's army in 1803, the Haitians, led by Toussaint Louverture, triumphed and established a revolutionary republic in 1804. It was the largest revolt of enslaved people and the only one known to have produced a free state. In reaction to this, the United States moved, along with France, to impose crippling economic sanctions against Haiti that lasted until 1863. Through this, a weakened Haiti was compelled to pay France so-called reparations to the tune of some 150 million francs in gold for the slaves who were freed from slavery. They were asked and pushed and forced to pay reparations for the freed slaves. It took Haiti more than a century to pay this debt off, through taking out huge loans from American, German, and French banks at exorbitant rates of interest. By 1900, Haiti was spending about 80% of its national budget on loans repayments, which wrecked its economy. By 1947, when the original reparations and interest were paid off, the place was basically destitute and trapped in a spiral of debt. Deliberately unmindful about European instinctive antipathy towards African people, or determined not to learn from it, the Africans in the French colonies in Africa voted in 1958 against decolonization in favor of continued association with France. In other words, in favor of continued tutelage under France. When finally a new colonial transition occurred, they allowed France to impose the CAF franc that you may have heard about, an instrument of monetary and financial domination that was instituted effective December 26 of 1945. This CAF operates as a political tool to control African economies and policies, and also as a device for transferring economic surpluses from these African countries to France and Europe. The Germans have mused that without this transfer of surpluses from these African countries, France today will be just another third world country. I bring these points up because the background history is important and essential to any evaluation of future conditions and challenges. What Africans who led the way into the diaspora, those who were brought in by force, in chains, what they have experienced should have served from the beginning as valuable lessons for the Africans who set out to come on their own, in a sense, in some way, voluntarily, in the first half of the 20th century. But this has not happened. The ignorance that has been shown about the conditions, the experiences of our people who were brought here into slavery, the determined ignorance that Africans on the continent have shown about it, persists when Africans move into these areas in the United States or Europe or elsewhere outside of Africa as immigrants. The ideology of Pan-Africanism, which arose out of Black universal oppression emerged not in the African homeland, but in the diaspora. We had African thinkers, inevitably, a number of them who emerged from this tragic, nightmarish experience of being used as donkeys for the benefit of Europeans for hundreds of years. The ideology was Africa focused, as one would expect, and it was linked with a firm conviction that Black people could expect no permanent or meaningful progress in a land dominated by whites or any other non-Black race. This is important. Those who led the way, were brought in here in chains, who became the first face of the diaspora of Africans. They developed this wisdom that fundamentally it was going to be very difficult for Black people to thrive in a society dominated by whites or by, in fact, any other non-white race. The project of a return to Africa required a campaign to redeem Africa from the hands of foreign exploiters and to establish in Africa a nation of our own. Quote, this is a quote, a nation of our own, strong enough to lend protection to the members of the race scattered all over the world and to compel the respect of the nations and races of the earth. You will see that the orientation was Africa-centric. They were thinking in terms of, in fact, Marcus Garvey's kind of movement, Back to Africa movement, was thinking in terms of looking towards Africa and creating a base of power that will provide I prefer the term dignification, the process of dignifying a race, recovering a race's honor, the honor of the people who have been brought low and trampled through the experiences of subjugation and dehumanization. The non-realization of the vision of Pan-Africanism and its Back to Africa movement, alongside the continuing weakness of Africa, has meant that the directional flow of Africans around the world has not been directed towards Africa, but from Africa to other parts of the world by way of immigration. The first wave of large-scale, violently engineered migration from sub-Saharan Africa to the United States began. The first wave of large-scale voluntary migration from sub-Saharan Africa to the United States began in the second half of the 20th century. Immigration Policy Institute has established that approximately 2.1 million sub-Saharan African immigrants resided in the United States in 2019, representing 5% of the total foreign-born population of 44.9 million. It is a highly diversified group comprised of individuals from 51 countries with a wide range of ethnic, linguistic, and educational backgrounds. The top countries of origin of Black immigrants in the United States are Jamaica, 17%, Haiti, 16%, Nigeria, 8%, Ethiopia, 6%. Compared to the total US immigrant population, sub-Saharan Africans are better educated, participate in the labor market at higher rates, and are more likely to speak English at home. They also have lower average incomes and experience poverty at higher rates than the foreign-born population overall. Black immigrants in general contend with both their status as foreign-born and with legacies of segregation and racism that have historically marginalized Black communities across the United States. Among the immediate background realities that would impinge on the lives of incoming African immigrants are the Tuskegee syphilis study. Before you're moving into another land, I think it is only logical for you to want to know what awaits you there. You need to have some idea of the political and ideological setting of the land that you are moving into. And I would consider this Tuskegee syphilis study the scientific treachery carried out in the name of public health, by which in 1932, the US Public Health Service selected an experimental group of 400 poor, uneducated Black males from Tuskegee, Alabama, to serve as study subjects. I consider that to be one of the monumental experiential lessons that one would want to be aware of. You're going into a place where, in the name of science, Black people, poor, helpless Black people, are assembled to serve as study subjects. As recently as 1932, the men were never told about the life-threatening disease, and worse, they were denied treatment. They injected syphilis into them, were not told anything about what they had done to them. And they were left for the disease to run its course, because the whole study was to find out how much suffering would be entailed in it and how these people would die. This was being done to African people as recently as 1932. You want to come here for whatever reason you are forced to come here to seek another chance in life, you need to know about this. There's also the issue, the scourge of eugenics and forced surgical sterilization of women and children considered to have undesirable disabilities and therefore considered to be a burden to the public. You're coming in, you should know that this is a characteristic feature of this land. If you want to, you prefer to be ignorant about the dynamics of the political and ideological system into which you are moving, it doesn't speak too kindly about your level of intelligence. But this has been characteristic of us, African people coming in here. We don't want to know anything fundamentally about what obtains here or what the African people, their kind, who have been here across 400 years, what they've been through and what they know. We don't want to interact with them for the most part, leave alone learn from them what they can teach us about what the experiences have been. We want to avoid them because somehow we think we are better. We've been indoctrinated even from afar to believe that they are the problem and deserve all the problems they have. But we are a different sort. And we will behave so well that we will enamor ourselves to the majority of the people who control the land. And therefore, we can expect better treatment, etc., etc. Eugenics and forced surgical sterilization of women has plagued African American lives for a long time. By the 1970s, the forced sterilization of Black women was so common in the American South that it was sometimes referred to as a Mississippi appendectomy. Mississippi appendectomy. You are considered to be not bright enough or to have certain kinds of weaknesses, disabilities that would make you a burden on society. In other words, you are not worthy to live, because the chances are that you are going to be useless and that you're going to force society to try to take care of you in some manner. It is better that you are not born, and if you're already born, then we are going to make sure that we dispense of your life any way we can. A report by the National Women's Law Center reveals that 31 states still have laws that allow forced sterilizations, some as recently as 2019. A report by the National Women's Law Center has revealed that 31 states in this country still have laws that allow forced sterilizations. Some of these laws were passed as recently as 2019. Now, you've heard about redlining, and this is just to pick a few of the things that would challenge these voluntary immigrants, because they are part of the landscape, the ideological and political landscape. You know about redlining, but I will say a little about it. It refers to the residential patterns of the native-born Black population, and it is rooted in a history of anti-Black laws and policies designed to keep Black people away from prosperous areas. These systems have for generations resulted in limited access to quality education, higher paid and family-sustaining employments, and alarmingly high rates. It has also led to alarmingly high rates of poverty in regard to Black children. Africans who are coming in as recent voluntary immigrants need to have read about these things before they came. Then they wouldn't proceed to make uninformed judgments about their own kind, who have been here for long stretches of history. They wouldn't. They would understand the predicament they have been in, the drawbacks that have hemmed in their existence. We are a peculiar people. There's no question about it. And in fact, it has also come out recently, in fact, just within the last couple of weeks, that this so-called IRS injustice, a recent study conducted by economists at Stanford, Michigan, Chicago, and the United States Department of the Treasury, has established that the IRS uses a software algorithm that causes 3 to 5 times the auditing of Black Americans' tax returns. They plague your existence with it every time you find yourself under the regime of an IRS audit. It is a way of impoverishment, but it's always of continuing deadly harassment of individual lives. These are important points. Black people have professionals, many of them have done quite well individually, but for the most part, we are a people who are disconnected. This connection, this unity has become something of a fetish, and we individualize our experiences and our problems in our existence. These little examples of these kinds of drawback experiences would have, under normal circumstances, propelled Black people, whether they are recent immigrants from Africa or whether they are living representatives of Africans who were brought in here in chains and who have lived over 400 years here. Under normal circumstances, these are examples of serious political environmental drawbacks that should have propelled the uniting of all of us into a force. And the kind of unity imperative that the early Black thinkers were thinking and talking about, creating an organization, an Africa-centric one, because that is the ancestral home is Africa. The resources are there, the land is there. Getting rid of all the foreigners who have emburdened our lives through exploitation over the years, and coming together and creating a power base that would enable us to freely move towards redemptive achievements, creative endeavors, creating a power base to envelop the existence of all Black people, those in Africa as well as those in the diaspora. That solution based on reasoned ideological thinking, intellectual ideology, that has been rejected. So instead, we find ourselves largely as individuals pushing against forces that are way too powerful for us to deal with, to handle. And it has made it easy for us to suffer in silence, to suffer alone. Individuals, I know individuals, some of the anecdotes, you wouldn't believe them. As a doctor who came here, he did specialized training into cardiology. He'd already done the medical degree back in Africa. And he was here working, got a job in rural Illinois hospital. And every time that people came in, white people, so to speak, came in needing help, and they found out that the doctor there was an African, a Black person, they did terrible things. They insulted him. Sometimes they slapped him, they spat at him. And he kept all this to himself. He wouldn't even disclose it to his own family, not to his wife or to his children. Because we prefer to pretend that all is well. We are doing extremely well. A big shot doctor. And this went on and on until he was finally exposed because he made a mistake of inviting one white person from the hospital who had become an acquaintance to his house for dinner. And the man brought the matter up in front of the family, saying, telling the wife, I don't know how your husband does it, but the abuse he takes, I couldn't last for one day under this regime of abuse and contempt. They keep it to themselves. They keep it to themselves. We have known people, a professor that I know, and a colleague in living in Maplewood in New Jersey, long distinguished professor living there quietly with his family. All seem to be well, and he's one of those people who didn't want to take his mind through the wider constraints that racism has imposed on us, and learn to live, because he believes if you work hard and then you're conscientious in your professional undertakings, you will do well. Until one day he was just jogging around the neighborhood and the police stopped him and picked him up. And for no reason other than that he was Black, beat him up, subjected him to abuses that he himself doesn't even want to care, doesn't care to disclose. It's a particular case of a Black diplomat. He came from Ghana. He wrote a book about it later on. His name is F.K. Hayford, and he wrote a book entitled Inside America, subtitled A Black African Diplomat. A Black African Diplomat Speaks Out. It is an important book. It was published in 1972. He came in to the the Ghanaian embassy, or High Commission, the consulate in New York, and he was determined to avoid Black people and try to seek to associate with white people, because even before coming, he had determined that Black people here, Black Americans, the Blacks, as they would put it, were not worth associating with. Their problem, and so on and so forth. And all the negatives, superficial negatives that Africans like to imbibe about their own kind, who were thrown here against their will, and who had lived lives that are not, you do not want to go into them. You have to have a very strong stomach to want to read into the chronicles of the sufferings that were perpetrated against our people living as donkeys, serving as donkeys of Europeans for all these hundreds of years. Their labor alone built the whole of the Americas, and they were being treated as worse than animals. We don't want to go there. And we prefer to buy into any notion that we are better. It is an important point to make, because essentially, ideologically, I'm a Pan-Africanist. And it is when the people want to travel through this world without an ideological compass, they are people who are not going anywhere. There's a saying that if you don't know where you are going, any road will take you there. And frankly, I make bold to say we don't know where we're going. Otherwise, we would draw upon the history of our people everywhere they have been, in Australia, in Indonesia, across Europe, across Latin America. In Argentina, they virtually have exterminated all of them. The concept of the Black Argentinian fundamentally doesn't exist. What they've done to them in Brazil, in Mexico, everywhere. And somehow we do not care to know about these things. We prefer to look inward into ourselves as a separate category of people that we think somehow are special or better than the others. And that is indicative of serious ideological infantility. That is indicative of the people who have never learned to grow up intellectually. And that is bound to make it very difficult for people like these to forge ahead. You are politically weak. You're culturalist people who have surrendered, capitulated to other cultures and created your own. And at the same time, come into audio. And at the same time, you are determined to hold yourself away from your kind in any form of inclusive organizations that will begin the process of politically reorganizing a race of people from the pitfalls of their lives, of their political existence. That work by Hayford is most important. He will go to a church in Manhattan, a white church, and he'll find that the pew he will sit on, no white person wanted to come there, even though there are long stretches of space left. He will find out that if he booked a reservation in the hotel, he gets there and without his name, without them asking to know his name, they are telling him that in fact there's no vacancy. He was posted to Washington, D.C. for a while, And the first day in the elevator where he was staying, the white woman who came in contact with him concluded that he was the new janitor that has been installed. He went through abuses upon abuses until he ended up writing this book to cry out about the problems of Black people in the United States and around the world.
Professor Agyeman, we have some questions from some of our viewers, and these are pertinent questions that I would like for you to address.
Sure.
And one person's question is, how can African Americans learn about their historical greatness when topics concerning their heritage are not taught? In your discussion so far, you mentioned how we contain the pain because sometimes we don't want to know. We don't want others to know we're suffering. But in this case, how do we even know the historical greatness when everything that could lead to that is being squashed? That is a question from one of the online
viewers. It's a good question, and I'm glad to answer it. The situation where Black people do not learn about their history, because it's only the history that can help to rescue us, that can give the psychological boost, because we were the pioneers of the world, the human pioneers that God created. And frankly, without any question, there's undisputed evidence of our creativity, great achievements in high civilizational achievements across Nubia, across Ethiopia, across Egypt. They've done everything to cover it. You don't expect your enemy to be the one who helps you to unearth your own glories in antiquity. It's a question of power. And I said, you know, when you lose power, as Walter Rodney said, you lose the capacity to make decisions that are necessary to enrich and protect your lives. It is not just here in Africa because of the reign of colonial tyranny. Up to this point in time, the curriculum of African universities that hardly touches on this. The history of Africa is about the history of Arabs and Europeans in Africa. They talk African history, and classes are about the time the Europeans came in, and then the period of so-called decolonization or nationalist struggle, and that's it. The thousands of years of African accomplishments should be the foundation, the bedrock of education, so Black people get to understand who they are, what they used to be, what brought us down, external and internal forces, factors that brought us down. We need to learn from that. We need to establish our historic enemies, our historic adversaries over these periods of time, while organizing ourselves to deal with contemporary world, the contemporary world in which we are still a disadvantaged people. We cannot do that in Africa. We expect these people here to help us to do it. They are not going to allow that. Fundamentally, the whole slavery adventure was based on our being considered as less than humans. I mean, the whole idea that we were considered 3/5 of a person, it was considered a generous evaluation of us. So why would they be interested? They wouldn't allow Black people even to read, to learn to read. And people who found a way themselves to do it, you know that by now, if they were caught, that would be the end of their lives. You don't expect them here. Look what's going on with this so-called critical race theory now, because they don't want to hear anything about slavery. They don't want to deal with the fact that it was by destroying masses of human life, turning humans into donkeys, that they built the capital through which inventiveness came, and which gave them the advantages to scour around the world. They don't want to. It is all their ingenuity, the specialness of their minds help them to build. They don't want the truth. Why would a people like this want the truth? It is not in their interest. They keep on saying it makes their children, their little children in school, uncomfortable to be told that they perpetrated these kinds of evils over the, so they don't want to be taught. You want it to be taught? And even in this environment, create your own schools. Create your own curriculum. We want to be part of them. We want to immerse ourselves in everything they do. We never want to establish the foundations of our own institutions and our own developmental processes. It's always wanting to be part of something that does not accept us as humans. It is amazing. African universities. I mean, you don't even know what you're talking about. People are spending all their life, university careers learning French, and I'm doing French. I'm majoring in French and immersing themselves in French culture, their language, and so on. What has that got to do with anything? That master's what? It is English, and I'm learning Chaucer and Shakespeare, and on and on and on. Nothing about ourselves, nothing about what happened all those years, what brought us down, the Arab enslavement period, what we went through. Now we are all Islamic. After what the Arabs used Islamic campaigns to do to us, we are now comfortably saying we've done their garbs, we have their names, we are an extraordinary people. You want them here to be kind to the idea of institutionalizing the teaching of Black history? It's not going to happen. I live here in Georgia now, where the government has been passing laws. And look at what is happening in Florida. Everything to take this out of the equation. That could push the country to serious waves of conflict. They are never going to give up, whatever it takes. Because fundamentally, recently somebody is just out there in Atlanta, Georgia, here in Atlanta. A Black guy is driving one of these vans delivering packages. And he gets into this neighborhood and this white man says, "I don't want you here." I said, "But I have something to deliver. I don't want your kind here. And I'm telling you, be careful about my dog around. He's a far more important entity than you. If you hit that dog, I will teach you what I think about you. You know, as far as I'm concerned, you are nothing." And they keep on saying that. Do you know what happened the way one school in California greeted Black History Month this year, taking a photo of some students, including one of the teachers, and then posting something about, a photo of monkeys celebrating Black History Month? You think all of these things go away because other people who are not Black people develop a kindness of spirit, a wave of intellectual charity. We want people to accept us, not because we are going to force them to by our achievements, the power we build, the accomplishments that we bring out, that completely wipes away the sorry past history that has tainted us. We want people to just accept us out of the kindness and goodness of their hearts. It never happens. No people, it never happens, but some other people will confer dignity on other people. It is something that you take by your own industry, by your own endeavor, by your own creativity, by your own commitment. And we have never learned that lesson. It is always what somebody else would do for us. Somebody, accommodations that some people should make. Oh, they should recognize, clearly, surely they should also realize that we are also human. And surely they should be kind. Surely, on and on. So we end up doing nothing for ourselves. Individual professionals are going to be here. They will continue to come. The more Africa's circumstances and fortunes disintegrate, and they're going to find that this is not exactly the environment for the kind of advancement that would really elevate their spirits as human beings. The limitations are severe, and we should have learned that from our people, our own kind who have been here for hundreds of years. The fact that we don't want to learn from them, the fact that we want to distance ourselves from them, the fact that we want to consider we are a separate breed of people makes the task of those who despise us that much more easy, because it indicates that we don't think. And people who don't think are not people who anybody can take seriously.
Professor Agyeman, another question from the group. African leaders, Nkrumah, Nyerere, Kaunda, and others believed in Pan-Africanism. Is this something we have lost in Africa? What role do ECOWAS and other systems play in this? That's another question from a viewer. Thank you.
It's a good question. I'm sorry to tell you, the Pan-Africanism, the racial Pan-Africanism that that young man from Jamaica started, he was the main ideologist, the main thinker, the penetrating thinker. I have not known any African who have been so completely on mark in terms of intellectual thinking about the existential problems of the African race. Nkrumah was supposed to be an apostle, a disciple of Marcus Garvey. Independence came in '57. Ghana was at the leader, the forefront into this decolonization process. Nkrumah pretended. He said in the beginning, even while he was in high school in Ghana, that he was into Garveyism. He read about this and that. He came here. He read more about his works. He concluded that he was the most fundamental influence on his intellectual development. And yet, when he went to Britain to attend the 1945 Manchester Pan-African Congress, he and George Padmore and others turned around to embrace Marxism. And I'm telling you that for the most part, a lot of people miss this, even including me. When he came home to Ghana and started this movement and so on and so forth, the Pan-Africanists in the diaspora, because that is where clear thinking about the real condition, the true predicament of Black people, that's where it was. They were hoping that getting a base on African soil by way of having an African country that was decolonized meant that they would now all join forces there. They will begin the process of sowing the seeds of Pan-Africanism within Africa and linking Africa to the diaspora in terms of the developmental process, the empowerment process. And Nkrumah turned it around into continental Pan-Africanism, Afro-Arab Pan-Africanism. He turned around to invite African states into, Arab states to join the African states into a Conference of Independent African States, or before that, All African Peoples Conference. Padmore, Du Bois, and the others were waiting for African representatives from the diaspora to be sent to Ghana to join the Africans there. That didn't happen. And this OAU and all the things that happened thereafter was up to absolutely had nothing, no bearing on the developmental hopes that we had. What do you have in common with Arabs who held you in savage, brutal slavery for so long? They set up harems of hundreds of women because their ideology, their religion fundamentally belittles women. That's not going away, moving away from it. One individual sets up a harem of 400 women, and they were bringing Africans from Africa, the cutting of their genitals, eunuchs, to serve them. So they couldn't have any congress with their women. They were all being cut and they were bleeding to death by the legions. Do you know how many African youths bled to death through this crude forms of surgery. And what did they not say about us? And they've stolen our legacies and all that. And Nkrumah was determined in the name of Marxism, universalism. We're going to have it has to be a color blind and race blind and on and on and on and on and on. So how would this ideology ignite into a potent force, the movement, when it is so completely adulterated? The somersaults that occurred from 1958 is very difficult to understand. It is something that I'm working on. I mean, it is absolutely impossible to understand it. You come here, you caught up in this Marcus Garvey movement and everything, because everywhere across the globe our circumstances are the same. Do you have any idea what your kind is going through in Mexico? What your kind is going through in Brazil, in Colombia? We don't care. And this divisiveness, this disease of divisiveness has reached a point where if they live in the same country, they don't want to relate to these people because of their ethnicities. An Igbo, I don't want to have anything to do with the Yoruba. If they live, and then if they have to deal with a neighboring territory, a neighboring country, oh, those people are Ghanaians. I don't, those. And then in the West Indies, the Jamaicans want to have very little to do with Trinidadians, Barbadians, and it is the disease of this divisiveness, this vortex, that defines our infantility, our incapacity to think. And I'm telling you, there's no greater havoc, no greater disabling element in our existence than this incapacity to think as a people. It is remarkable, after all that has gone on, that we end up like this. And it just so it's so easy for us to be dominated. It's so easy for us. Pan-Africanism in Africa, it died at the hands of Nkrumah in 1958. It died. If you are going to link it to the Arabs, you've lost your way. You've lost your way. We are a people who are seen as an automatic collectivity. Everybody sees us as one mass of undifferentiated inferiors, except ourselves. We are the ones who want to separate from one another, for everybody sees us as one of a kind. But we are determined. We are determined. They see us as a race of slaves, because that blemish of 400 years going back will not go away until we come up with reorganization and stupendously startling accomplishments to wipe out that history. It won't go away. And as long as it doesn't go away, we are all seen as one mass of donkeys. We don't understand this. And the Yoruba don't want to mix with this, and that one doesn't, and this one this, and that one that. On the only people we want to associate with, the only peoples are Europeans. And we want their culture. We have used their names. Everything of theirs is what we want. We want to look like them. We want the language. Even when Africans gather together, they're going to be speaking in one of these languages. We haven't done what it takes. I was in Dar es Salaam recently, in South Africa, making the point that we need to create a composite language, a new one for African people, drawing on all these African languages and creating one, complete with a script. We need to start the process of rebuilding our cultures and not be people who are drawn and sucked into other people's. And that's why, the European way, they say that we are people, we are imitators of them. We say we imitate them the same way monkeys imitate humans. That's what they say, because everything they do is what we imitate. How are we going to have, Pan-Africanism? It died a long time ago.
Wow.
All that name about now, OAU is now African Union, and you should see who controls it, the money. And you could see even they have councils where Israel is part of it. You have countries that are across the world, European countries, and they are the one making decisions because the financing is largely from the European Union and other Western. We don't want to do anything by ourselves. We don't. And if the money comes our way to do it, we will just use it to buy the things that our racial betters have built. We are not thinking of doing anything by ourselves. We want the cars, but we won't build our own. We want the this, but no. It has to be what they have done, and we should plunder our societies and go and buy them. Nobody looking at us really sees the workings of truly human minds. They don't see it. And you should forgive when non-African people look down upon us the way they do. It's remarkable how much we have accepted and the notion of our inferiority, how we have embraced it. It comes out in everything. No people can be that helpless unless they enjoy being denigrated, derogated the way we are. Nobody should be that helpless, but we do not care. This is the problem. We do not care. Look at South Africa. The Europeans came there. What they did to you, took out the gold and the diamonds and what the brutalization of human lives. And then in the end, you agree, Nelson Mandela, and South Africa belongs to all the people who live in it. That is his answer. Let's create a rainbow nation. Reconciliation. Those who have destroyed the people, the owners of the land, they destroy their birthright, brutalize them, turn them into worse than animals. Now we should reconcile with them. Let them take everything they've already taken. But let's now accept that we will create one nation and everything, nothing has changed. The wealth is still in their hands. So much poverty ensnaring the lives of the Black people in South Africa. And the Asians in the middle, and the so-called Coloureds, the scourge of miscegenation. Africans have never cared to learn about it. In Africa itself, where the Europeans set out to create a race within a race that they could use to further their project of subjugation. We don't want to go into that. No schools in Africa has a curriculum that deals with it. The Portuguese made a statement. God created white people, God created Black people, but the Europeans created the mulatto. And all Black people do is to create more by themselves. And people who are biologically forced and psychologically to have a conflict within themselves about two races that are at war, two warring races. There's something so fundamentally wrong with us as unthinking beings. And it's just, you just do it. Nobody says, but this thing we are doing, you go to South Africa, they're all living separately. They don't even want to relate to their mothers, the African side of them. They are better because there's European blood in them and they live separately. And it is so in Brazil and so on and so forth. But nobody says, well, wait a minute, this thing has not served our interest well. When South Africans were fighting against apartheid, the Khaled so-called group, they supported apartheid. It has been so in every part of Africa where this kind of struggle has raged. They have supported the destroyers of Africans. But no, never mind. We will just have more by ourselves. We will create them, and we are a race that nobody knows what the constituency of this race is anymore. It weakens us. Chancellor Williams, in his book, Destruction of Black Civilization, says, there's no race with this internal problem, a race within a race, a hostile race, he says, within the race. But never mind, because we are not ones to think. Education serves no purpose because the curriculum is useless from top to bottom. And so we live lives that doesn't reflect people who have learned anything about the past or the present. We live lives that indicate people who are not capable of sitting down and going through constructive, coherent thinking about anything. And that's a problem. For Africans, the continent, for Africans who are abroad in other countries.
Thank you, Dr. Agyeman. I have one last question. All too soon, time is against us, but I have one last question from one of our young viewers. And it says, do you believe there is ever going to be a day where the African American community is not haunted by this history and by the unfair treatment they received by other powerful forces? And what are the first steps towards this, or what exactly needs to be acknowledged by others outside the community for us to move forward? So it's a question within a question, and this is going to be our last question before we run up.
The problem of Africa, as I said, when you look at the situation with China, it became a major power in the 5th century. It decided not to go outside of China and dominate others. They settled down on the philosophy of leading by example. Later on, we saw what the Europeans did to them in the Opium Wars. And many of them became scattered. Those who came here suffered considerable ignominy, used to build railroads, treated like animals, on and on and on. The answer was not about what really could be done here in the United States. It was answer about what could be done in China to restore the homeland, to provide the haven, provide a power base that makes people who want to attack Chinese people in any significant way take notice, take note, take pause. It is difficult to see how within the United States, Black people can really seriously elevate themselves above the realm of continuous, unceasing destructiveness that goes on. Hayford, that African diplomat who learned the hard way what this country represents for Black people, says that he became aware of the rapidity of the killing of Black people to an extent that, to his amazement, it ceased to be newsworthy every time he turned on the TV. It has gone on and on and on. If you are inside of the belly of the beast, what are you going to do to create a situation where the beast does not control you? Some people have suggested the idea of getting one state here, a breakaway state, so Black people all over the United States will go there, move there, and get their own land and so on and so on. It's not going to happen. Everybody knows it's not going to happen. The whole issue is about creating a power base for the race. Marcus Garvey is talking about creating a place, a land, a government of our own that has capabilities to protect African people wherever they live and to confer dignity on them, raise their human honor. You're not going to be able to do that here. You're going to continue to do the the Martin Luther King thing. You parade and you plead and you make statements that appeal to the conscience of the white community, essentially. You are left with that. It can take you only so far. You will find out that in the 60s, the Cold War context helped a bit, and people misread that. because of the conflict between the East and West, the Soviet Union socialism and the capitalism embedded in capitalistic imperialism embedded here. The United States was beginning to feel uncomfortable when racism manifested itself so openly that Black people were being hounded down with police dogs, the shooting, the killings, and so on television everywhere. Black new diplomats in the 60s, African diplomats coming here from Africa and experiencing it, going into a place saying, I want to buy a Coke, and people spitting at them. And it became a serious embarrassment for the State Department. There's reports about this, that we have to do something about this. Otherwise, we will lose the Cold War. The way we are perceived around the world will suffer. It is not because they came to the conclusion that it was necessary on the basis of Christian charity or whatever to have a change of mind about Black people. It doesn't matter that Martin Luther King decided to capitalize on that kind of rhetoric and all men are created. They never meant that to include Black people. All men are created equal. And so. But he used it deftly. And these people at that time were moving to be a little receptive precisely because the situation of the United States versus the Soviet Union was becoming untenable. They had to do something about it, passing some of those civil rights legislations and all that. It was because of the specific nature of the international system at the time. People don't seem to be aware of it. And they think that will continue. This is a process. So when you hear them say, oh, it's been a backward trend. And there was this thing under Lyndon Baines Johnson in the 60s, those civil rights acts, and they expect it to continue. No, that's why there has always been the reversibility of these gains. Voting Rights Act today, and the next day it is nullified. The Supreme Court nullifies it. It becomes just something like, a fragment, a useless fragment lying around. Instead of moving forward the way that they thought would happen to encompass all other areas, no, it was not going to. The moment the Cold War ended, the moment that original Cold War, the conflict between the Soviet socialism and capitalism ended, and the Soviet Union was no longer going to be saying, look how you talk about freedom and human, look how you're treating those people. The moment that fixture was removed, they didn't have any incentive. I don't see that within the United States, any of these things any further kind of developments along those lines are going to happen. And that is why if we are thinkers, we would want to go back to the original Pan-African framework of thought. But we are not people who are known to be determined to work hard to solve our own problems. We've bought into universalism, everything. It's Marxism. The whole world will fight and get rid of capitalism and everybody will be free. As if even if that happened, Black people would not be continued to be seen as the ones who couldn't cut it themselves, who couldn't make it by themselves. They don't see that will never go away. But somehow we buy into that. And then we are all people, and then we will work together, and we shouldn't cut ourselves on the basis of racism, racist strategies, and we should always buy into the broader framework, and we are all humans. Well, the others don't quite consider that we are as human as they are. That is the problem. And you want to tout your self-serving religion of universalism of humanity. They don't buy it. And nothing in the history of the last hundreds of years supports it. We are a people who, because look, all these kinds, any kind of endeavor, especially if it relates to human liberation and dignification requires tremendous amount of work and sacrifice. It does. Mao Zedong was living in caves, the leader of the forces that overturned, that took out the developing colonization of China. The process of trying to colonize it and disband it, balkanize it the way they did to Africa. The British took Hong Kong, the Americans and Taiwan. Before that, the Japanese, Portuguese took Macau, and those guys. The process of fighting to reverse that, the guy was living so modestly, so devotedly. When President Nixon, Henry Kissinger went there to try the demarche between the United States and repairing the conflict between, they took him in a very old Toyota, and they took him to this cave where the leader Mao Zedong was living. You enter it, there's nothing. There's a big table there with books, and there's a wooden bed. And he was just planning how to save his people. This was all that mattered. They spent years living in the most austere fashion possible. They were using bicycles up and down China as the mode of transportation, while they now consolidated savings for the development that was to come. In Africa and among the moment the little money comes, you see what they do with it. The Japanese cut themselves off when they saw what the Europeans were doing in other parts to Africa and then other parts of Asia. They cut themselves off. You know about the shogunate era. 213 years. They cut themselves off from the world in order to consolidate from within. They knew there's something about these Europeans coming out of the so-called Black Plague. It created a people who seem to have no respect for the lives of others, people who are not Europeans. What they were doing was not thinkable to many minds. They saw what was happening and they said, no, we policy of closure. And that meant that they were not going to import luxuries from any other countries. What was important was that they consolidate from within. And when they re-emerged, they were going to be in a position to protect the society from any kind of colonization. Japan was therefore never colonized. But it takes a revamping of values. Not people who behave like children, who think in terms of whatever the resources are, let us just consume it. Those people who are in entertainment in this country, who make money, look what they do with it. And then they complain about, oh, these people and their schools, and they're complaining. All they think about it, if we integrated the schools and things will be better for us. Why do we always think in terms of what somebody else will do for us, in terms of assimilating into other people's structures and getting better that way? What is the problem? Black women now, when they are pregnant, they go into hospital for childbirth. The chances are they are not coming out alive. The child is not coming out alive. They are so many times more likely to die than white women. Everybody knows it. It's been written about, but nobody is talking about, maybe we should have our own hospitals. Maybe we should produce more Black doctors. Maybe we should have our, no, it is why do they allow this to happen to us? And to tell you the truth, the non-African elements in the society are tired of it, of dealing with children and the whinings of children. You want the truth about us? You want the truth about us? You know, it is never, oh, all the money, and then the guy is signing a contract for $30 million for throwing a ball. And what is he going to do about it? because there are no councils of Pan-African strategies. Nothing. Nothing. Let me go and marry a non-African woman is the first priority and give the money to them. Over and over and over and over and over again. A race of people, those who are athletes who play soccer in the European Union, in Europe, you see them. So the best of them, you get the ball, you're playing, and people are chanting. Monkey. You're making monkey sounds and throwing bananas at you. They don't take us for anything. And FIFA keeps on campaigning, please, no racism, oh no. Because what we really need to do by ourselves, what we really need to do by ourselves, we do not want to contemplate. We don't want to do it. And if you prefer to live your lives like infants, like unthinking infants, then don't complain when you're treated like children, always. Thank you.
Professor Agyeman, this has been a very thought-provoking session. Thank you so much. You're very passionate about Pan-Africanism, I can see. And on behalf of Women Leaders in Action, we thank you for your time. And I think the best way to put it is we all need to go back to our books and read and inform ourselves, because this session has been very informative. We thank you for everything that you've done during this past hour, and also for your professionalism and your knowledge. Impeccable. We are very grateful.
Thank you for inviting me. Thank you.
Thank you. I also like to acknowledge and thank the executive and board members of Women Leaders in Action, Friends of Women Leaders in Action, for making this event a reality. We appreciate you for your time and for your comments. The questions were just also very thought-provoking, and we've learned so much. I have learned a lot today. And knowledge is power. That is where we should take it. And always remember, if you think education is expensive, try ignorance, in the words of a famous person. So let's keep it going. Let's keep the discussions open, and let's read more and learn more about the African race. On that note, I also like to include and acknowledge my staff who came in at 8 a.m. today to set everything up. Thank you so much. Please join us next month as we celebrate Women's History Month. We would have an episode on women's history, and we will send that information also through our social media platforms. Once again, Dr. Agyeman, thank you very much. And since you mentioned using English and other languages, I will refer to the Akan language, the Chi language, and say, yeah, that's a papa. Yo, any okay. So you see, I learned something from the yes, and I also like to thank Dr. Agyeman's wife, Doreen, who's Opoku Agyeman, who's also an advisory board member, for making this possible. Doreen, thank you also, Medasve. And it's bye-bye.
Bye-bye.